This is my 1973 Toyota Hilux. I bought it earlier this year, got it running and driving, drove it home. We drove it around a little bit, realized that the automatic transmission that was in it was no good. It was actually kind of garbage. So I manual transmission swapped it. We got it running a little bit better, took it on a 500-mile road trip, and it did really well, in all honesty. Had a couple small issues. There was a coolant leak, so I had to bypass the heater core. It had an overcharging issue, so I'm gonna have to address that. And then it got parked, and it's been sitting for about 6 months. And in that 6 months, I've done nothing to it. In fact, I've taken a couple parts off of it. There's no battery, it's been sitting for a long time, and today that's about to change. I'm gonna get this thing started up. I've got a good battery there. We're gonna get it pulled into the garage, assess all of the issues that we've been having, and get this thing ready to turn into my daily driver. I really like this truck, and I know that if I don't fix the few things that are wrong with it, it's never gonna do anything but sit here. So it's time to get working on this thing, get it going again, and have a really cool car to drive around. First thing first is we of course gotta pop the hood. As you can tell, I haven't been under the hood in a while. There's a bunch of spider webs. That's an alternator that came off of my Corolla that looks like it's going to be a good fit for this and hopefully stop the overcharging issue. I pulled the radiator out for my Corolla and it ended up not fitting, so the radiator's sitting in the bed. It's got no battery and, well, it's a true ran when parked situation. It did. I drove it and parked it right here, so it should just fire up. It's got gas in the tank. The gas shouldn't be too old, less than 6 months old, about 6 months old. So I'm gonna throw a battery in it and we're gonna see if we can get this thing fired up and pulled into the garage. Then we can start assessing some of this wiring, assessing the heater core bypass, clean it up a little bit, get the radiator back in it, swap out the alternator. Just a bunch of maintenance things that honestly needed done to this thing a long time ago, and they're the only reason this thing hasn't been getting driven recently. Also, I have heard from the previous owner that there's a good back window for this thing waiting for me, and I just gotta go pick it up. So that was a little bit of my motivation to getting back into working on this thing and hopefully getting it back on the road again. We got a battery in it. That shouldn't go anywhere. It'll start and run into the garage without a radiator in it. So this should be good, and hopefully it fires up as good as it did when I parked it, because it honestly ran really good when I parked it. So we're gonna jump in, turn the key over, and see what happens. There's not quite as many spider webs on the inside of this thing as there were on the outside. Oh no. Does look like I might have had some mice in here at some point though, so that's not good. I'll vacuum this out. Make sure this thing's in neutral. Kind of what I expected. Sounds like it's trying. Oh. Look at that. She fired up. It just took a second. I'm sure there was almost no fuel in the fuel lines, and it probably had to pull it all the way from the tank uphill to the motor. So now let's get it pulled into the garage. It might be a little bit of an issue with how flat that tire is, but the tire on the other side's not flat, so we'll see. Oh, we're gonna make this turn. Parking brake doesn't work. We got this thing in the garage. It marked its territory just a little bit coming in. It's got some coolant that it sprayed out, just everything that was in the engine bay, it's decided to spray out. But other than the one flat tire, it drove itself in, which is pretty cool. And now it just needs a bunch of long needed maintenance. Like I said, got an alternator to replace, got to put the radiator back in. Currently the radiator's sitting in the bed. This is exactly how I drove it back from my road trip. So I have not touched this thing other than to move it to where it sat since I got back from the 500-mile road trip. So it should be good to go. I just got to get a bunch of things fixed up and get this thing ready to drive every day and reliably. I wish it had AC or wing windows because it's still summertime and it's still hot out. But other than that, this thing is going to be a sweet daily. And I'm honestly kind of excited to start driving something that catches attention. First thing first, we're going to put some air in these tires and get this thing actually rolling again. Hopefully this tire holds air. Oh, look at that. This tire is from 2007 according to the date code. So we're working on 17 years old now. Then we can move on to getting a radiator in this thing and getting the alternator swapped out. And that should fix most of our engine issues. And then after that, we'll jump into the interior, clean it out a little bit, and then see what's going on with the heater core. If I remember right, it was just a rubber hose that broke. So if we can get that rubber hose fixed up, we'll have a heater again. And that's pretty important for a truck you plan on driving, especially considering it's almost September, so winter is just around the corner. Next thing we got going on is this alternator was overcharging the battery, causing it to boil, giving us some issues. We were running like 15 volts. It actually fried the phone charger I had when I went on my road trip, so we're gonna need to assess that. And this is the alternator that came off of my 2TC out of the 79 Corolla before I engine swapped it. It looks to be the same, and it even has the same square plug. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to actually just take this alternator, replace this alternator with that one, and hopefully that fixes our issue. I actually don't even know if it's an internally regulated alternator. Some of them have internal regulators, some of them have external regulators, but I do know that I have that alternator sitting. I threw it under the hood of this thing because it was the same. And before I put the radiator in, it looks like it'll be a little bit easier to get this alternator swapped out with that extra bit of room.
Start it up.
We got the alternator out. It's right here. It looks as though there was a little bit of melting going on in the back of the plug, but other than that, it looks decent. And then this is the alternator out of my 79 Corolla. And I got a 77 parts Corolla, and this is the alternator out of the 77. Unfortunately, and this is why you always check parts, I was going to use this one, but the plug on the back is actually different. So we've got this plug, which is got no plastic spacers in between. We've got the 79 plug, which has plastic spacers in between. And in the 77 Corolla, we're back to the no plastic spacers in between. So that's good news. That means this should be a direct bolt-in replacement. And other than that, if you set this one aside, mechanically, they look the same. They look like they've got the same offset between these two ears and the tensioner ear. They look like they've got the same offset from the mount points to the pulleys. So I'm pretty sure this is the exact same alternator. We're going to go ahead, throw it in, and see if it fixes our overcharging issue. We won't know till we get it in and get it started. But like I said, it's a ton easier to access all this with the radiator out of this thing, so we have all that extra space. So I'm going to go ahead, throw it in, get it bolted in, get everything tensioned with the belt, and we can go back to throwing this radiator in and then assessing our heater core leak. One thing I almost forgot, but luckily didn't, is that I had a coolant leak coming out of this thermostat housing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna pull this off, and there's an O-ring in there that's leaking. It's not a normal size. The O-ring's smaller than most any thermostat gasket you can find. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna RTV around the whole thing, squish it back on, and it should be good to go. There are definitely better ways to do it, but that's gonna be the quickest, easiest, and I'm gonna be most confident that that's gonna seal it. Just a quick little wire brush cleanup, throw it back together with some RTV, and I think we'll be good to go.
This is lit.
And while we're fixing small issues, I have one that's more of a pet peeve than anything. This negative terminal does not fit any battery. So this positive terminal will go all the way to the corner. It fits any kind of post battery, but this negative terminal, it's pretty limited. And I need a good solid ground to the block so that the starter has a good solid ground. And I figured I should fix that. So I hopped over here. I've got this bucket of miscellaneous wiring with all sorts of charging harnesses and ground harnesses. And I found this, which I'm almost certain came out of my Supra when I 3RZ swapped it. And it's a much longer ground cable. So what we've got going on is, since this is so much longer, it'll be able to reach wherever I want in the engine bay. And I can even move the location of the ground point to something like down here, to where it's a little further out of the way and not quite so in your face. And it's already loomed with some decent looking split loom. So we're gonna do that, and then we can just disconnect this little chassis ground that's going to it, and we can move that as well. That will just come right off of this harness. We can take this off the block, and we'll have the ability to put any kind of battery we want in this thing, including that random battery that I tried to pull it in with that just didn't really want to fit well. Look at that. We got the battery terminal extended to where it now reaches wherever we need it to reach. We've got the radiator in. I hooked up the lines. I'm going to try and figure out maybe a more permanent overflow solution, but for now, this is still here. And before I go filling it with coolant, we need to assess what's going on in here. So this hose back here, which is behind this shield, it's buried up in there, and I'm going to have to dig it out. But there's like a 2-inch chunk of hose right there that is very much so leaking. It was pouring all over my foot when I was on the road trip. It got me all nice and wet, and coolant doesn't really dry out, so it was pretty nasty. After we get interior all wrapped up, we're gonna be able to unbypass this heater core, and that's gonna help a ton because we're gonna need a heater, and that'll complete the cooling system. I think I got the heater core issue fixed, and I actually ended up taking out the entire little valve that turns on and off the flow to the heater core. And my reasoning for doing that was, it looks like it's been leaking for a long time. There's a bunch of corrosion, a bunch of buildup, a bunch of coolant buildup. And when I went to go take it off, this little 2-inch hose was absolutely disintegrated. So I just hooked the hose straight to the other side of the heater core. As long as the heater core itself isn't leaking, we shouldn't have any issues. And it might be a little bit warmer in the summer, but I'm not super concerned about that because I think it'll work out great. And now I can go ahead and fill up the cooling system, bleed the cooling system, and see how this thing does. It doesn't really have a coolant gauge, but I'm not too worried. These old 1820Rs are pretty much air-cooled in my experience. It takes a lot to overheat them, and especially the older they are, the more likely they are to just be pretty well bulletproof. And this is going to be one less failure point for coolant to pour all over my feet on my next trip in this thing. We got the heater core unbypassed, everything hooked up, but when I was doing that, I noticed that our carburetor is not tight. A tight carburetor is important so that you're not getting super lean mixtures and it's not sucking in air that's not going through the carburetor to mix with fuel. I guess maybe I'll have to pull the carburetor off to figure out why this whole base plate is moving. So I'm going to start tearing into that and figure out what exactly is going on, because the bolts that hold the carburetor on are tight. I think there's an adapter plate because this has a Weber on it, and that might be what's causing us some issues. After digging into the carburetor, which was a little bit of a pain, I had to make myself a special little shorty wrench. I don't have a set of stubbies, so I made one. And then we had to get this adapter plate off, which adapts from this bolt pattern to that bolt pattern. And here's our issue. So it probably wouldn't have been a huge deal, but I'm gonna go ahead and since I'm here, I'm gonna pull this out. I'm gonna re-Loctite all of these. Yeah, none of them are tight. I turned them all by finger. So we're gonna take all these out, re-Loctite them. I'm not sure if they have Loctite on them currently, but I'm going to Loctite them. I'm gonna make sure they're nice and tight, and then we're gonna put everything back together, and that should solve that issue. A little bit sidetracked, still haven't finished filling up the radiator, but that's all right. We're gonna fix all of these little issues and make this thing a lot more reliable and a lot more ready to be driven every day. So I'm excited to get this thing back up to par. We got the carburetor back on. It is nice and tight, no longer wiggles back and forth. We went ahead, we filled up the radiator, we filled up the overflow. We fixed that coolant leak, we fixed the coolant leak in the cab, we put a new alternator on it. I think, just maybe, this thing should be completely back together. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start it up, try and get some of this coolant flowing, hopefully, and get everything bled, all the air bubbles out of the cooling system. We should be ready to go for a drive. It's exciting. Okay, she starts right up again. I think we just needed to get fuel back to the carb. Get some coolant flowing, try and get the air all bled out of the system. Woo, she's a bit smoky. Yeah, she's a bit smoky. Don't know exactly what's going on there. It does burnouts. That's cool. I love doing burnouts. I really do. I think we've got a ton done. We've got a radiator in it, we've got a battery in it, new battery cable, we've got the coolant leak fixed, we've got the secondary heater core coolant leak fixed, the carburetor's now tight, it's got a new alternator on it, and all in all, didn't take a whole lot of time, half a day. We got a bunch of stuff done, feels a whole lot better, and this thing's one step closer to being a driver. I really don't like vehicles that just sit and do nothing, and I was honestly contemplating what I was going to do with this thing, but now I can drive it and contemplate what I'm going to do with it while I'm enjoying it. So I've got some pretty big plans for this thing. It's just going to take a little bit of money, a little bit of time, and some parts gathering. But for now, we've got one more vehicle on the road ready to enjoy. I also went ahead and vacuumed it out because there was some mouse crap in here. No longer got mouse crap in here, and it's ready to drive. Let's see it and back it out of the garage. That's how I remember it starting. Nice and easy. Look at that. Can't see anything behind me, which I kind of hate, but that's okay. Oh yeah. It feels good to be behind the wheel of this thing again. Although I do remember how tight this engine, or this cab is, because I'm all the way back in the seat and the steering wheel is way up in my lap. This is one rattly old truck. I forgot how rattly it was. Oh, this thing is gonna be fun. It's gonna be an enjoyable drive, but it's definitely not gonna be a long road tripper, that's for sure. I am starting to remember after 5 minutes just how unenjoyable 8 hours in this thing was. So, not too concerned. Seems to be doing okay. We got most of the mechanical issues finished on this thing, but there's still one major issue that has been bothering me since we got the truck. This back window is plexiglass. You cannot see through it. It is horrible when you're driving it. And there's this, which means that there's always water pouring in the truck when it starts raining. It doesn't really keep the weather out. It's always windy, and it's just bad in every respect. And on top of that, the rubber gasket's gone. This is the rubber gasket that was in there. It's hard as plastic. And like I said, there was a window waiting for me. I finally got the window. I'm so excited to get this thing in the truck. I am genuinely so happy about this. Real glass, it's clear, you can see through it. It's tinted in the center, I don't know why, but you can see through it. I'm super excited about that, and it's all real glass. The only issue is that there is no rubber gasket, and as you saw, the rubber gasket on the window is destroyed. So I'm gonna go, I have some Toyota pickup windows in my shed. I'm gonna go grab a gasket off of one of those and see if we can make it work. I'm all but certain it's gonna be way too big, but I think even if it's too big, we can cut it down, make it work, and have it fit this window in this truck. And I know it'll seal better than the gasket that's in there now. Here's our gasket. And as I predicted, this gasket is massively too big. So it's not really gonna work in that aspect, but I've got a really good feeling that we can go ahead and make it work. We're just gonna have to cut the gasket and have a couple seams in it, which will not be the end of the world. I know it will still seal better than this gasket. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna start ripping this plexiglass out, fitting up this rubber gasket on the window, and seeing how we can start to get it installed in the truck. It looks like this rubber gasket just slides right in. Oh, it's backwards. Slides right in, and this slides into the sheet metal on the truck, and this seals around the outside of the cab. And it looks like that'll work just great for here. That little lip will slide around this sheet metal, and then the rubber part will seal against this bottom and around the edge. So ain't nothing to it but to do it. I'm gonna start removing the plexiglass and getting a rear window in the Hilux. Got this nasty plexiglass out of there, and we're gonna go ahead and start putting the gasket on this window that's ready to go in. Everything looks like it fits up good. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna start working this around, figuring out how I can possibly get these corners figured out to where they're not too terrible. I think what's gonna work best is I can get this corner to go around and just cut it right here at this little, what looks to be a seam anyway. And then from there, I can butt up flat with right here and start doing a straight piece along the bottom. It looks like I should be able to do that on both sides. That's just the best thing I can think to do, so that's what I'm gonna do. I don't know for sure it'll work, but it's better than trying to make this 90 work, because that's definitely not gonna work. I've got this rubber gasket run along it, and I think it's gonna work out. I'm just curving the end with this straight piece and then button them up real tight. I'm gonna have a heck of a lot less of a gap than there was with the previous gasket and the plexiglass, so I think it'll work out okay. I'm gonna try and get it in the hole. Well, it was a workout and a half getting that window in, but luckily my neighbor came over, Stoney, he's a great guy, and he gave me a hand with it, just giving some pressure where I needed. And all in all, I think it looks great. There's a couple places where it's sticking out just a little bit, like right there, but it's in there so tight. I am very much so not really worried about leaks. It's in there. These windows, they're in there. Oh no, no, don't break the window, Nicholas. Just talking about how they're in there. Might need to clean everything out a little bit, but these windows are in there. The fitment on this is way better than I expected. It fits in the hole real well. This window's not going anywhere. I'm sweating through my shirt after trying to get that thing in, but I think it worked out fantastic. I know it's gonna seal better because right here doesn't just open to the driver's compartment. I would like to take a razor blade and razor blade off all the tint. There's like a plastic film on this window. I think this window got replaced at some point. All in all, probably my favorite upgrade I've done to this thing, and I haven't even driven it yet, but it just looks so much better. And that's with the tint in there and everything. Since we're working on window stuff already, I'm probably just gonna go ahead and peel this tint off. Razor blade it off, I should say. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Taking crappy tint off is one of the most satisfying things I've ever done, and I've done it a few times. Oh my goodness. So fresh and so clean. You can see through it. What is it? I can see clearly now. The plexiglass is gone. I'm so excited. I think I might actually be able to see out of this thing when I'm backing up. And actually, while I'm on doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and fix these mirrors. One of those things I've been meaning to do since I got the truck, especially this side. There's one little bolt holding this mirror on, so I would like to put something on here to just prevent it from going back and forth. And I think that'll help a ton. I might actually be able to back this thing up, park it in parking spots, stuff like that. So I'm feeling good about this truck. It's just about fixed up. Went ahead and fabricated up a couple little 90-degree brackets, through bolted it, and now this mirror isn't going to be scratching the truck up, and it might actually work as a mirror. I actually already went ahead and adjusted both the driver and passenger side mirrors, and I've got a feeling I'm going to be a ton more comfortable driving this thing. I can see behind me. Yeah, everything's dirty. I can see behind me, and most importantly, when I turn my head behind me, I can see behind me. All of a sudden, this thing's got like 10 times the visibility it did before. I do need to go ahead and clean all of the windows and not just the back window. But all in all, I'm very pleased with everything. And the last thing I got to do is I went ahead and I got a voltmeter. So I'm going to test and make sure this alternator is not charging at like 15 volts like the last one. All right, let's see where this thing's at for voltage. Oh my goodness. 13.6 volts, almost 13.7. Absolutely perfect. I think we finally got this thing somewhat dialed in. Jumps up to 14.2. That should be just about right. I am absolutely thrilled with how this thing is coming together. Step by step, we're getting this thing dialed in. I am super happy with the progress we made on this thing this week. In just a couple afternoons worth of work, we completely transformed this thing from something that was riddled with problems to something that is completely dialed and ready to hit the road. If you like this thing and you want to see it on its next adventure, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. I really hope to catch you on the next one.